In the shadowy world of elite military operations, identity can be the difference between life and death. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you'd never suspect, the quiet janitor, the nervous recruit, or in this case, the woman you just cornered in the shower facility. What happens when predators discover their prey is actually an apex predator in disguise? Commander Sarah Chen had perfected the art of invisibility over 15 years of covert operations. At 5'4" with gentle brown eyes and an unassuming demeanor, she could blend into any crowd, slip past any guard, and infiltrate environments where a typical Navy SEAL would stand out like a beacon. Today, that skill was being put to the ultimate test. The Blackwater training facility housed some of the military's most elite units, but it also harbored something darker. For months, intelligence had suggested that a human trafficking ring was operating within the base, using military transport to move victims across international borders. The operation was sophisticated, protected by high-ranking officials, and nearly impossible to penetrate from the outside. So Sarah had gone in as maintenance specialist Lisa Park, a quiet civilian contractor responsible for cleaning and minor repairs throughout the facility. For 3 weeks, she'd mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and remained virtually invisible while gathering intelligence. Her Navy SEAL training made the physical demands laughable, but the psychological challenge of maintaining her cover while witnessing glimpses of the operation was testing her limits. The women's shower facility in Building C had become her primary focus. It was here, according to intercepted communications, that the trafficking victims were processed before transport. The facility's location, isolated from the main training areas and accessible through service tunnels, made it perfect for clandestine activities. Sarah arrived for her evening shift at 2,100 hours, wheeling her cart of cleaning supplies through the dimly lit corridors. The base was quieter at night, with most personnel either off-duty or engaged in night training exercises miles away. Perfect conditions for illegal activities. As she approached the shower facility, her enhanced hearing picked up voices from within. She slowed her approach, every muscle in her body automatically shifting into tactical mode while maintaining the appearance of a tired janitor finishing her rounds. "Transport leaves at 0200, a gruff male voice was saying. "Make sure they understand what happens if they try to run." "Copy that, Sergeant," came another voice. "The new batch should be arriving within the hour." Sarah's blood ran cold. This was it, the break they'd been waiting for. But, as she prepared to retreat and call for backup, footsteps echoed in the corridor behind her. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, blocking her escape route. Well, what do we have here?" The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, a man whose files Sarah had memorized. 6'2", 220 pounds, with a dishonorable discharge from his previous unit for assault charges that had mysteriously disappeared. "You're not supposed to be in this sector tonight, sweetheart." Sarah kept her posture slouched, her voice meek. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just finishing my rounds." "The work order said." "I don't give a damn what the work order said." Webb stepped closer, his breath reeking of alcohol. "You've been asking too many questions, poking around where you don't belong. We've been watching you." The other 2 men flanked her, cutting off any possibility of retreat. Sarah recognized them from the intelligence files, Private Rodriguez and Corporal Jackson, both with questionable service records and connections to the trafficking operation. "I don't know what you mean," Sarah said, clutching her mop bucket tighter. "I just clean, cut the act," Webb snarled. "You think we're stupid? The way you move, the way you watch everything. You're either a cop or a fed, and, either way, you're about to become a problem solver." They forced her into the shower facility, the heavy door slamming shut behind them. The tiled room echoed with their footsteps as they cornered her against the far wall. Steam hung in the air from recent use, creating an oppressive atmosphere that would have intimidated any normal person. "Here's what's going to happen," Webb said, pulling out a combat knife. "You're going to tell us exactly who you work for, and, then, you're going to join our special cargo for tonight's transport. Lot of people overseas would pay good money for someone like you. Sarah let her shoulders shake, tears forming in her eyes. Please, I don't understand. I'm just trying to do my job. Wrong answer. Webb lunged forward with the knife. What happened next would be talked about in special operations circles for years to come. Sarah's transformation was so sudden and complete that it seemed like a different person had materialized in the room. Her slouched posture straightened into a perfect combat stance, her frightened expression hardened into cold determination, and her gentle demeanor vanished entirely. She caught Webb's wrist mid-thrust, her grip like a steel trap. The knife clattered to the floor as she twisted his arm behind his back with surgical precision. Before Rodriguez could react, Sarah's leg swept his feet from under him, sending him crashing into the tiled wall with a sickening thud. Jackson reached for his sidearm, but Sarah was already moving. She released Webb, spun, and delivered a devastating elbow strike to Jackson's solar plexus that dropped him to his knees, gasping for air. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. Webb stumbled backward, clutching his wrist, his face pale with shock and recognition. What the hell, who are you? Sarah stood in the center of the room, her entire bearing radiating lethal competence. The frightened janitor was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to commanding elite warriors in life-or-death situations. Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy SEALs, she said calmly. And, you're all under arrest. The silence that followed was deafening. Rodriguez groaned from where he lay crumpled against the wall. Jackson was still fighting to breathe. Webb stared at her in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. That's impossible, he whispered. You're nobody. You're just the cleaning lady. Sarah smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The best cover is always the one nobody expects. You've been looking for your leak, Sergeant Webb. Well, you found her. The sound of boots in the corridor announced the arrival of backup. Sarah had triggered her emergency beacon during the confrontation, and, within minutes, the facility was swarming with FBI agents and military police. The trafficking operation that had seemed untouchable was about to crumble. But this was only the beginning. As Sarah stood over the three men who had tried to make her their victim, she knew the real challenge was yet to come. The trafficking ring was larger than anyone suspected, and exposing it would put her in more danger than any combat mission she'd ever undertaken. The woman who had spent 3 weeks emptying trash cans and cleaning floors was about to remind everyone why Navy SEALs were considered the most elite warriors in the world. The interrogation room at FBI Field Office Delta was designed to break people down, but Commander Sarah Chen sat calmly across from Special Agent Rebecca Torres, appearing completely unaffected by the sterile environment. She'd changed from her janitor's uniform into standard military utilities, and the transformation was startling. Gone was the invisible maintenance worker, in her place sat an officer who commanded respect through presence alone. Let me get this straight, Agent Torres said, reviewing her notes. You've been undercover for 3 weeks as a civilian contractor, living in base housing, eating in the mess hall, and nobody suspected anything? Sarah nodded. The best camouflage isn't about blending into the environment, it's about becoming invisible within it. People see what they expect to see. A middle-aged woman pushing a mop cart doesn't register as a threat. Middle-aged? Torres raised an eyebrow. You're 34. Exactly. I allowed people to make assumptions based on my behavior and appearance. Slouched shoulders, tired expression, cheap clothes that didn't fit properly. The human brain fills in the gaps with stereotypes. The door opened, and Admiral James Harrison entered, his expression grim. Sarah stood immediately, snapping to attention. At ease, Commander, he said, taking a seat. Hell of a thing you've uncovered here. The preliminary sweep of Building C turned up evidence of at least 20 victims processed through that facility in the past 6 months. Sarah's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, that's just the beginning. The operation I witnessed tonight was small-scale. Based on the communications I intercepted, they're moving cargo twice weekly. We're looking at hundreds of victims. Agent Torres leaned forward. What communications? We didn't find any recording equipment in your gear. Sarah tapped her temple. Photographic memory and perfect pitch. I can recreate every conversation I overheard, including voice patterns that could be matched to audio samples. It's part of my training. Admiral Harrison studied her with the calculating gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating elite warriors. Commander, your service record is unique. First woman to complete SEAL training, multiple classified operations across 4 continents, and, somehow you've managed to stay completely off the radar for most of your career. That was intentional, sir. My specialty has always been deep cover operations. The moment my face becomes widely known, my effectiveness diminishes significantly. Well, that cat's out of the bag now, Torres said. 3 men at Blackwater saw you in action. Word will spread. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Which is why we need to move fast. They know I'm here now, which means they'll accelerate their timeline or shut down completely. The Admiral pulled out a classified folder. Intelligence suggests the trafficking ring extends beyond Blackwater. We have evidence of similar operations at Fort Mitchell and Naval Station Norfolk. If you're right about the scope, we're looking at a network that could reach into the highest levels of military command. Sir, I need to see the files on the other installations, Sarah said. If this is a coordinated network, there will be patterns, personnel transfers, supply chain overlaps, communication protocols. Give me 48 hours to analyze the data, and I can map the entire operation. Torres shook her head. Commander, you've already been made. Your cover is blown. We need to extract you and, no. Sarah's voice carried the kind of authority that made even seasoned FBI agents pause. Extraction means they disappear, clean house, and set up somewhere else. How many more victims die while we're chasing ghosts? The risk to you personally, Admiral Harrison began. Is acceptable, Sarah finished. Sir, I didn't spend 15 years perfecting unconventional warfare tactics just to walk away when things get dangerous. This is what I do. The room fell silent as both the FBI agent and the Admiral processed her words. Finally, Torres spoke up. What are you proposing? Sarah stood and moved to the whiteboard, her movements precise and economical. They think they captured their leak, but they don't know what I actually discovered. Webb and his team were bottom-level muscle. They know someone named Lisa Park was asking questions, but they don't understand the scope of her knowledge. She began sketching a diagram on the board. We stage my escape. Make it look like I overpowered my captors and fled the base. Then, I go underground, really underground this time. No official support, no communication protocols, just me and 15 years of survival training. That's insane, Torres said. You'd be completely on your own. Sarah turned back to face them, and, for the first time, they saw a hint of the predator that had destroyed 3 armed men in a matter of seconds. Agent Torres, I've spent months behind enemy lines with no support, living off the land while gathering intelligence on terrorist cells. I've infiltrated drug cartels, weapons smuggling operations, and hostile governments. This trafficking ring, sophisticated as it might be, is still just criminals playing soldier. Admiral Harrison leaned back in his chair. And, if you're captured? If they discover who you really are? Then, at least we'll have confirmation of how deep this goes, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. But, that won't happen. They've already underestimated me once, fatally, in Webb's case. They won't get a second chance. The Admiral and the FBI agent exchanged glances. What Sarah was proposing violated every protocol for handling compromised assets, but her track record spoke for itself. More importantly, conventional approaches had failed to penetrate this network for over a year. "What would you need?" Admiral Harrison asked finally. Sarah smiled, the first genuine expression of pleasure she'd shown all evening. "Just what I brought with me. Everything else, I can acquire in the field." Torres pulled out her phone. "I'll need to clear this with my superiors. The Bureau doesn't typically authorize one-person operations against organized crime networks." "Then, don't tell them," Sarah said simply. "As far as official records are concerned, Lisa Park escaped custody and disappeared. Commander Sarah Chen was never here. If I surface with actionable intelligence, we move forward. If I don't surface..." She shrugged. "Then, you investigate my disappearance and pursue other leads." The weight of what she was proposing settled over the room. Sarah wasn't just asking for permission to go undercover again, she was volunteering to essentially vanish from existence, with no backup and no safety net, to hunt down a criminal network that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill. "There's something else," Admiral Harrison said quietly. "Intelligence suggests this network has military-grade weapons and training. These aren't just criminals, some of them are former Special Operations personnel." Sarah's expression hardened. "Sir, with all due respect, that just makes them traitors. And, in my experience, traitors fight with desperation, not discipline. They've forgotten what it means to serve something greater than themselves." She moved back to the whiteboard and added several more elements to her diagram. "The trafficking operation requires coordination across multiple bases, which means communication networks, transportation assets, and financial systems. All of those create vulnerabilities that can be exploited." "By one person?" Torres asked skeptically. "By the right person," Sarah corrected. "Agent Torres, you're thinking like law enforcement: build a case, gather evidence, follow procedures. I'm thinking like a warrior. Find the enemy, fix them in place, and destroy them." Admiral Harrison stood. "Commander, I want your honest assessment. What are the odds of success for this operation?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Unknown, sir. But the odds of stopping this network through conventional means are effectively zero. They've had over a year to study law enforcement techniques and adapt accordingly. What they haven't prepared for is someone who operates outside those parameters." The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, weighing the decision that could end his career or save hundreds of lives. Finally, he nodded. 48 hours, he said. "After that, if we haven't heard from you, we assume you're compromised and move to Plan B." "What's Plan B?" Torres asked. Sarah was already moving toward the door. "There is no Plan B, Agent Torres. That's what makes this work." As she left the room, neither the Admiral nor the FBI agent spoke. They both understood they'd just witnessed something remarkable, a warrior volunteering to walk into hell because it was the right thing to do. What they didn't realize was that for Sarah Chen, hell was just another battlefield. And she'd never lost one yet. 3 days after her supposed escape, Sarah Chen moved through the underbelly of Norfolk like a ghost. She'd traded her uniform for the layered clothing of the homeless, her hair dyed black and, streaked with gray, her posture once again transformed into that of someone broken by life's hardships. To anyone watching, she was just another invisible person society had forgotten. But, beneath the carefully constructed facade, one of the Navy's most lethal operatives was hunting. Her target tonight was Marcus Delacroix, a former Marine sniper who'd been dishonorably discharged 3 years ago for selling weapons to civilian contractors. Intelligence suggested he was now running security for the trafficking network's Norfolk operation. More importantly, he was sloppy, the kind of man whose arrogance made him vulnerable. Sarah found him exactly where she'd expected, Murphy's Bar, a dive that catered to ex-military personnel with flexible morals and cash flow problems. She'd been watching the establishment for 2 nights, learning the patterns, identifying the players, and mapping the social dynamics that would allow her to get close to Delacroix. The bar reeked of stale beer and broken dreams. Sarah shuffled to a corner table, ordering the cheapest beer available and settling in to watch. Delacroix held court near the pool table, regaling a group of younger veterans with stories of his overseas deployments. His voice carried the particular bravado of someone trying to convince himself he was still important. "Told that raghead if he didn't start talking, I'd put one between his eyes from 1,000 yards out," Delacroix was saying. "Course, didn't have to. They always break once they know you're serious." Sarah studied him over her beer. 6'1", approximately 190 pounds, favoring his left leg slightly, probably an old injury. He wore an expensive watch and gold chain that suggested income well beyond what legitimate security work would provide. Most tellingly, he kept checking his phone every few minutes and glancing toward the bar's back exit. He was expecting someone. Sarah's patience was rewarded 20 minutes later when a woman in business attire entered through the rear door. She was clearly out of place in the rundown establishment, but she moved with purpose toward Delacroix's table. Sarah enhanced her hearing, focusing on their conversation while maintaining her appearance as a half-drunk vagrant. "Package arrives tomorrow night," the woman said quietly. "Pier 17, container ship Maersk Providence. 23 girls, ages 14 to 22. Sarah's blood turned to ice, but she kept her expression vacant, staring into her beer as if the conversation was meaningless background noise. "Transportation?" Delacroix asked. 3 vehicles, same as always. Rodriguez will handle the escorts." The woman slid an envelope across the table. "Your cut. Mr. Kozlov wants to expand the operation. He's impressed with Norfolk's efficiency." "Kozlov." Sarah filed the name away along with every other detail. The woman's accent suggested Eastern European origins, possibly Russian or Ukrainian. The mention of efficiency implied this was an established operation with a track record. "What about that problem at Blackwater?" Delacroix asked, lowering his voice. "Handled. Webb and his idiots got careless, but the leak has been plugged. Business continues as usual." Sarah's jaw clenched. They thought she was dead or out of the picture entirely. Good. Let them believe they were safe. The woman finished her drink and left through the same back exit. Delacroix checked his phone one more time, then gathered his entourage and headed for the front door. Sarah waited exactly 90 seconds before following. The street outside was dimly lit, perfect for surveillance work. Sarah tracked Delacroix's group from a distance as they made their way through Norfolk's warehouse district. Her years of urban warfare training made the pursuit effortless. She was a shadow following shadows. They stopped at a converted warehouse that appeared abandoned from the outside. But Sarah's trained eye picked up the subtle security measures: cameras disguised as weathered fixtures, motion sensors hidden in seemingly random debris, and at least 2 guards positioned in windows that provided overwatch of the entire street. This was no amateur operation. Sarah spent the next hour conducting reconnaissance, using techniques perfected in hostile cities across 3 continents. She mapped guard rotations, identified entry and exit points, and catalogued the facility's weaknesses. Most importantly, she confirmed what her instincts had been telling her: this was a major hub, not just a way station. As she prepared to retreat and plan her next move, her enhanced hearing picked up something that made her blood run cold: children's voices, speaking in what sounded like Spanish and possibly Thai. Young voices. Terrified voices. The victims were already here. Every instinct screamed at her to act immediately, to breach the facility and extract the children before they could be moved again. But, her training overrode emotion. A solo assault would likely result in dead hostages and a scattered network that would be impossible to track down later. Instead, she forced herself to withdraw and think strategically. Back in the abandoned building she'd claimed as her base of operations, Sarah spread out hand-drawn maps and began planning. The warehouse operation was larger than anything she'd observed at Blackwater, which meant it required more personnel, more resources, and more coordination. Those factors created opportunities. She opened her encrypted satellite phone, a piece of gear that officially didn't exist and connected to communication networks that weren't on any government registry. After entering a complex sequence of codes, she established contact with the one person she trusted with this information. Nighthawk, came the familiar voice of Master Chief Petty Officer David Park, her former teammate and the only person outside official channels who knew her current mission. Raven, Sarah replied, using her operational call sign. I need a favor, off the books. Always do. What's the situation? Sarah briefly outlined what she'd discovered, including the planned shipment and the current location of victims. Master Chief Park listened without interruption, a habit developed during years of working together in hostile territory. Jesus, Raven. You've stumbled into something big. Bigger than we thought, Sarah agreed. I need surveillance assets on container ship Maersk Providence, arriving tomorrow night at Pier 17. And, I need them deployed without triggering any official notifications. There was a pause. That's going to require calling in some serious favors. Then, call them. These children don't have time for bureaucracy. Copy that. What's your play? Sarah studied her map, weighing options and calculating risks. I'm going to do what we do best, Chief. I'm going to break things until the bad guys make a mistake. Raven. Master Chief Park's voice carried a warning. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Even you have limits. Sarah smiled grimly. Chief, remember Kandahar? How could I forget? You took out an entire Taliban cell with nothing but a knife and 20 minutes. This isn't any different. They think they're hunters, but they've never faced a real predator. After ending the communication, Sarah began her final preparations. Tomorrow night would bring the confrontation she'd been building toward since discovering the trafficking operation. But, this time, she wouldn't be a maintenance worker or a homeless vagrant. Tomorrow night, she would be exactly what her Navy SEAL training had forged her into, an unstoppable force of nature with a very specific target. The traffickers had made their first mistake when they underestimated her in the shower facility. Tomorrow, they would make their last mistake when they discovered that some lines should never be crossed. Especially when Commander Sarah Chen was the one enforcing them. The Maersk Providence materialized out of the fog like a ghost ship, its massive hull cutting through Norfolk's harbor waters as midnight approached. From her concealed position in the Port Authority's abandoned radio tower, Sarah watched the container vessel through military-grade optics, counting security personnel and mapping their positions. The operation was more sophisticated than she'd anticipated. 3 black SUVs waited in the shadow of Pier 17, their engines idling. Additional security teams had positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the dock area, creating overlapping fields of fire that would challenge even elite military units. But, Sarah wasn't planning a frontal assault. Her satellite phone vibrated twice, Master Chief Park's signal that his surveillance assets were in position. Hidden throughout the port, former Navy SEALs who owed their lives to Sarah's actions in various classified operations had volunteered for this unofficial mission. They wouldn't intervene directly, but they would ensure that evidence of tonight's activities reached the right people. The container ship docked with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, a specific container was being offloaded by a crane operator who was clearly part of the operation. His movements were too precise, too rehearsed to be routine cargo handling. Sarah activated her throat microphone. Package is mobile. Moving to intercept. She descended from the tower using techniques learned during urban warfare training, moving from shadow to shadow with the fluid grace of someone who'd perfected the art of invisible movement. Her target wasn't the container itself, it was the communication network coordinating the operation. Every trafficking ring relied on constant communication between multiple elements: the ship's crew, the ground security team, the transportation units, and the command element. Disrupt those communications at the right moment, and even the most professional operation would fragment into manageable pieces. Sarah had identified the communication hub during her reconnaissance, a modified shipping container positioned to provide line of sight to all operational elements. Inside, she'd observed at least 2 operators managing radio traffic and coordinating the various moving parts. Getting to it would require crossing 50 yards of open ground covered by multiple security positions. For most people, it would be impossible. For Sarah, it was Tuesday. She began her approach during a shift change between guard rotations, using the brief window of reduced coverage to cover the first 20 yards. A drunk dock worker, actually Master Chief Park in disguise, chose that moment to stumble into the security perimeter, drawing attention away from Sarah's position. The remaining 30 yards took her directly under the pier, where she moved hand over hand along the support beams like a spider traversing her web. Years of maintaining peak physical condition made the traverse effortless, even while carrying her equipment load. She emerged directly beneath the communication container, positioned herself, and began her ascent using climbing gear that would leave no trace of her presence. The container's ventilation grate provided access to the interior, where she could hear 2 voices coordinating the operation. Alpha Team reports package secure. Moving to secondary location. Copy, Alpha. Bravo Team, maintain overwatch until transport clears the perimeter. Sarah dropped into the container like a falling shadow. The 2 operators never knew what hit them. Within seconds, she had control of the entire communication network. More importantly, she now had direct access to the operational frequencies being used by every element of the trafficking ring. It was an intelligence windfall that would have taken months to develop through conventional surveillance. But Sarah wasn't interested in building a legal case. She was interested in ending this network tonight. She keyed the primary frequency. All elements, this is command. Operation is compromised. Initiate emergency evacuation protocols immediately. The response was immediate chaos. Security teams began repositioning, transportation units started abandoning their posts, and the ship's crew began emergency departure procedures. In the span of 30 seconds, Sarah had turned a coordinated operation into a panicked retreat. But the real genius of her plan wasn't the initial disruption, it was what happened next. Negative, negative, came a voice she recognized as Delacroix. Command, authentication required. Who is this? Sarah smiled and keyed the microphone again. This is Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy. You're all under arrest. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came an explosion of radio chatter as various elements of the operation tried to confirm whether the transmission was real or some kind of electronic warfare attack. She's supposed to be dead, someone screamed over the radio. Webb said he handled the leak. How the hell did she? Sarah cut through the chaos with military precision. Attention all personnel involved in trafficking operations. You have 60 seconds to surrender before I begin hunting each of you individually. I recommend you choose wisely. The response came in the form of gunfire as security teams opened fire on anything that moved, including each other in some cases. The carefully orchestrated operation had devolved into complete chaos, exactly as Sarah had planned. She slipped out of the communication container as silently as she'd entered, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was hunting. The first security team never saw her coming. She materialized behind their position like a nightmare, disabling 3 armed men in hand-to-hand combat before they could radio for help. Their weapons and ammunition became her equipment as she moved toward the next target. Delacroix had positioned himself with the transportation teams, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the deteriorating situation. Sarah could hear him shouting orders over the radio, but his voice carried the edge of panic that came from fighting an enemy he couldn't see or predict. All teams converge on the container. Find her and put her down. Sarah was already moving to her next objective, the container holding the trafficking victims. She'd counted 23 young women being transferred from the ship, matching the number mentioned in the bar conversation. Getting them to safety was her primary mission, everything else was secondary. The container was guarded by two men who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah approached from their blind spot, using the fog and darkness to mask her movement. Her training made the confrontation swift and decisive. Inside the container, she found exactly what she'd expected and exactly what she dreaded. 23 young women, ranging in age from what appeared to be early teens to early 20s, huddled together in terror. Most showed signs of abuse and malnutrition, and all bore the hollow-eyed expression of people who'd lost hope. "My name is Sarah," she said gently in English, then repeated it in Spanish and broken Russian. "I'm here to help you. You're safe now." One of the older women, probably Ukrainian based on her features, spoke hesitant English. "You are police?" "I'm something better," Sarah replied, helping the young woman to her feet. "I'm someone who's going to make sure the people who did this to you never hurt anyone else." The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted the conversation. Sarah's radio crackled with frantic transmissions as the trafficking network's backup teams arrived on scene. The hunters had become the hunted, but they still had superior numbers and firepower. Sarah activated her emergency beacon, summoning the backup that Master Chief Park had positioned around the port. But, even with reinforcements coming, she was still outnumbered 15-1, trapped in a shipping container with 23 victims who couldn't run. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that Navy SEAL training was designed to handle. Sarah checked her acquired weapons and smiled. The traffickers thought they had her cornered, but they'd made a fundamental error in judgment. They were still thinking like criminals trying to escape justice. Sarah was thinking like a warrior protecting the innocent. And there was no force on earth more dangerous than that. The final confrontation began at 0347 hours when Delacroix's backup team surrounded the container holding Sarah and the trafficking victims. Floodlights pierced the darkness as armed men took positions in a loose perimeter, their confidence bolstered by overwhelming numerical superiority. "Commander Chen," Delacroix's voice echoed through a megaphone. "You're surrounded. Send out the merchandise and we might let you live." Sarah's response came not through words but through action. The container's rear doors exploded outward as she triggered improvised explosives created from materials found in the communication hub. The blast temporarily blinded the attackers and created a gap in their perimeter. But, instead of fleeing through the gap, Sarah went in the opposite direction, directly toward the largest concentration of enemy forces. What followed would later be described by witnesses as a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Sarah moved through the port facility like a force of nature, using every piece of cover, every shadow, every structural element to her advantage. Her years of combat experience in urban environments had taught her that in close-quarters battle, superior numbers actually became a disadvantage when properly exploited. She struck the first team from above, dropping from a crane platform onto their position with lethal efficiency. Before they could react, 3 more traffickers were down and Sarah had acquired additional weapons and ammunition. The second team fell victim to misdirection. Sarah used the port's PA system to broadcast fake surrender negotiations while flanking around their position. By the time they realized the transmission was a recording, she was already among them. "How is one woman doing this?" someone screamed over the radio. "She's not a woman," came Delacroix's bitter reply. "She's a goddamn Navy SEAL." But, even as Sarah systematically dismantled their forces, she faced a tactical problem that no amount of training could completely overcome: time was running out. The longer the fight continued, the greater the risk that the traffickers would execute the hostages rather than lose their merchandise. That's when Master Chief Park's surveillance team made their move. Former Navy SEALs began emerging from concealment positions around the port, turning the hunters into the hunted. The gunfire became three-dimensional as elite warriors engaged criminal amateurs in the kind of close-quarters battle that special operations forces trained for but criminals only experienced in nightmares. Delacroix found himself caught between two nightmares, Sarah attacking from one direction and Master Chief Park's team closing in from another. His carefully planned operation had become a massacre, but not the kind he'd intended. "Fall back to the ship," he ordered. "We'll cut our losses and, negative," Sarah's voice cut through his transmission. She'd retaken control of the communication network and was using it to coordinate with her backup team. "Master Chief, they're trying to reach the Maersk Providence. Cut off their escape route." "Already on it, Raven. We've got friendlies aboard that ship cutting the engine cables." The reality of the situation hit Delacroix like a physical blow. His escape route was gone, his men were being systematically eliminated, and, somewhere in the darkness, the most dangerous woman he'd ever encountered was hunting him personally. He made the fatal mistake of trying to use the hostages as leverage. "Chen. I've got a clear shot on your container. Surrender now or the merchandise dies." Sarah's response was to appear behind him as if she'd materialized from thin air. "Wrong answer," she said quietly. The confrontation lasted exactly 4 seconds. Delacroix was a trained sniper with combat experience, but he'd spent years fighting from distance, picking off targets who couldn't fight back. Sarah was a close-quarters specialist who'd perfected the art of killing in confined spaces. When the shooting stopped, the port was silent except for the sound of sirens approaching from multiple directions. FBI vehicles, military police, and Coast Guard cutters were converging on the scene, summoned by Master Chief Park's emergency calls once the shooting started. Sarah stood among the wreckage of the trafficking operation, watching as paramedics began treating the rescued victims. 23 young women who'd been destined for a life of slavery were going home. The network that had operated with impunity for over a year was destroyed, its personnel either dead or in custody. Agent Torres arrived with the FBI response team, finding Sarah calmly reloading her weapons while Master Chief Park coordinated with the arriving federal agents. "Commander, you were supposed to wait for backup," Torres said, though her tone suggested admiration rather than criticism. "I had backup," Sarah replied, nodding toward the former SEALs who were providing security for the crime scene. "Just not the kind that follows federal regulations." Admiral Harrison arrived via helicopter as the sun was rising over Norfolk Harbor. He surveyed the scene, multiple enemy casualties, 0 friendly casualties, and a treasure trove of evidence that would dismantle the entire trafficking network, with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades evaluating military operations. "Commander Chen," he said finally. "Your mission report is going to be interesting reading." Sarah managed a tired smile. "Sir, with respect, most of this mission is going to stay classified. The methods used here." She gestured toward the scene of systematic destruction. "Let's just say they wouldn't survive legal scrutiny." "What about the broader network?" "Our intelligence suggests this was just one node." Sarah pulled out a data storage device. "Every communication, every contact, every financial transaction that went through their network tonight. Plus complete recordings of their coordination protocols. We didn't just stop this operation, we mapped their entire organization." Agent Torres accepted the device with something approaching reverence. "This intelligence will let us roll up trafficking operations across 3 time zones." "That was the idea," Sarah said simply. As federal agents began processing the scene and arranging for victim care, Sarah found herself standing with Master Chief Park at the edge of the pier, watching the sunrise paint Norfolk Harbor in shades of gold and crimson. "Hell of a thing, Raven," Park said quietly. 23 lives saved, major criminal network destroyed, and justice served to people who deserved it. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. It's not over, Chief. This network has connections we haven't traced yet. Tonight was a victory, but it's not the end of the war. So what's next? Sarah looked out over the harbor, where Coast Guard vessels were escorting the Maersk Providence to a secure berth for complete forensic examination. Somewhere in the ship's cargo manifests and crew records were clues that would lead to the next phase of the investigation. Next, we follow the evidence wherever it leads, she said. These traffickers made the mistake of targeting American military installations. That makes it personal. Master Chief Park grinned. God help them. As Sarah walked away from the pier, transitioning from warrior back to investigator, she reflected on the night's events. She'd entered Norfolk as a supposedly dead maintenance worker. She was leaving as herself, Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy, protector of the innocent and nightmare of the guilty. The trafficking network had discovered what many enemies had learned before them: there was no hiding place dark enough, no operation sophisticated enough, and no threat credible enough to stop her when innocent lives were at stake. They'd trapped what they thought was a helpless woman in a shower facility 3 weeks ago. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous, a warrior with a mission and the skills to complete it. The hunt was just beginning. The end.